you're here. It means a lot to us, and we also want to give a big shout out to our panel who is here today and our watchers online as well. So let's open in prayer, and then we will get started with questions. The first half of questions we have pre-made. We're going to ask our panel members, and they've looked over these questions. Then we'll take about a 10-minute break for bathroom, grab some more cookies and drink. During that break, we'll have you drop your questions that you guys write on your slips in the basket in the back, and we'll kind of review those questions during the break, and then we'll come back together and answer those questions for you. So those can definitely be anonymous and any type of question that we can help you answer specifically. So let's go ahead and bow our heads in prayer. Dear Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day. Thank you for this group of people here today, Lord, that just seek your guidance and tips to just better support those that they love or better support ourselves. Just be with us today and help us to just learn to trust in you and give us some good tips to walk away with that we can really just feel confident in your love for us and your plans for us. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. All right, so we will start by introducing our wonderful panel members here today. So we will start with Kayla, maybe work our way around. So if you guys just want to share your names, your background, all of you guys are here because you have experience with children and or counseling. So just let us know everything that we can. Just know why you're our experts today.
I'm so glad everyone was able to make it today, so thank you all for coming. Like she said, my name is Kayla Myers. I'm the director here at Clubhouse Central. We have a preschool here, and it'll be 5 years. I've worked here in May, and we go in 5 years. And before that, I worked at Knox County Head Start. I worked there for 3 years, and I focused then on family-child engagement. So that's kind of my last experience in the last 8 years working with kids.
Hello, my name is Nina, and I am a therapist at 4C Therapeutics, and I work with children, teens, and adults. And before that, I worked at Cornerstone of Recovery, so I worked with adults who had substance abuse issues. Before that, I worked at what was then Peninsula Village, and that's a treatment center for adolescents with behavioral issues and substance abuse issues.
Thank you.
I am Karen Ketchum, and or Karen Ketchum Tuck, probably says Tuck on there, I think. I am a middle school teacher, and I'm finishing my 24th year of middle school teaching, but I've been working with kids since 1989 in a professional capacity.
Awesome.
I'm Phyllis Wilburn. I question the word expert. I was a high school teacher for, I have 31 years of state service. I started with Human Services and then Adult Activity Center, so every job gives us more experience. I'm a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 5, and so a lot of my experience, certainly I know a little something about high school kids, but my experience with little people has been with my grandchildren mostly.
I'm Ken Cummins. My background is probably a little different than theirs. I was a graduate of Georgia Tech as an engineer back in 1977. I did engineering with the Air Force for 11 years. I did some engineering consulting with the CIA for a while. And then I told my wife I felt like I had a call to become a minister and maybe even a counselor. And she said, "Don't you have to have compassion for that?" And so that kind of gives you the kind of that background. I did go to seminary for a while at Southwestern Baptist Theological and became involved in Christian ministry as a discipler and counselor primarily for adults. I did that for about 13 years. My wife and I, Daryl, have been married for about, I think we'll be married for 37 years in 16 days and 22 hours from now. I'm not sure I counted for California time when we actually got married. But, anyway, so we have had 3 children. I have a 33-year-old son who will be 34 pretty soon. And I have a couple of 30-year-old twins. One is a boy, one's a girl. And even though they grew up with the same parents, they are 180-degree different kind of people. And it's not just gender. So, so my experience largely has been with adults counseling, and in almost every case that I had, a lot of them were anxiety-ridden adults, and if you take their history, you would find almost all of them would relate their anxieties back to something in childhood, either at home or in church or in school or in some other activities that they were involved in, and usually on a continuing basis, and they developed a lot of anxieties. And so my views on how to parent and how to help kids with anxiety are driven by my understanding of adults who I've counseled.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And my name is Hannah Collins, and I'm the Director of Children's Ministries here at Central. And we wanted to put this together today for a couple of reasons. One being, for Children's Ministries, it's not just about the children. We want to be here to help support parents, too, because I'm also a mom of two littles, and parenting is tough. And there's not exactly a expert manual per se, one that you can always go to. So we want to provide those resources as much as we can to this community. We think that's part of loving people and being a church is providing that. And then on a personal level too, I was not an anxious child at all. Very bubbly, outspoken child, but the older I've gotten, the more anxious I have become. So I'm excited today just to glean information for you all, for myself and for my children as well. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you all. All right, so we'll jump into our first question here. So I have them down ready to read if you do not care. So anxiety in children is becoming more frequent and diagnosed. In recent years, and especially after the pandemic, the urgent need to pay more and more attention to mental health has become clear. The World Health Organization notes that depression, anxiety, and behavioral disorders are among the leading causes of illness and disability among adolescents. So the question that I have for all of you all today is, other than the pandemic, what other factors do you all believe have caused a rise in children and teens with experiencing anxiety? So feel free to answer those in any order.
Okay,
Is ready?
I'll go first. So I've taught school, this was my 24th year. So I was in school, or as a teacher, before cell phones were in every kid's pocket, before they were in every parent's pocket, before social media. And the difference that has made is, I think, probably the biggest difference. And I think there's a lot of elements to think about when you come to that. So my students right now, and I'll let some of the other, because I know you've got some ideas about how the social media affects their self-esteem and that sort of thing. And so I'll let you speak to that. But I want to talk about, I think, two things as far as that goes. I think the first thing, one year, a couple of years ago, I went to the cafeteria and had lunch with my children, or with my students, and I noticed almost all of them were on their phones in some capacity. So I sat down with a group of students, and I sat down with, there were about 4 of us, and I had a game. I had a little game that we played, and we had a great time. We were laughing, we were enjoying ourselves. And I took note of the kids around me and the games that they were playing. So then, or the ones that they were playing on their phones. So we went back to the classroom. A week later, I asked the students that I had sat with, what was the game? What were some of the things we laughed at? And they could tell me the game and the things that they laughed at, the stories. I asked the students that had sat near us, that had stayed on their phone and played their games on their phone, what was the game? And they had no idea. I had written it down, I knew. And I asked them, and the ones that remembered the game that they played, I asked them if they had won. Did you win the game? Did you lose the game? They had no idea. So I think the first thing to recognize is this constant, what's happening is we are not creating social memories. There are no stories to go to. There are no, when the kids are so addicted to their games, and the makers of these games work with people who were in Vegas creating gambling games. They're designed for addiction. So, but our kids are playing these games. They're not making social memories, and social memories develops personality, it develops stories, but most importantly, it develops this idea of belonging. So if you know anything about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so I've tried to teach this to my students, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the bottom need, the first need that has to be fulfilled is the need for physical health. Once that's fulfilled, your brain can move on to other things. But if it's not fulfilled, your brain focuses on that until it's fulfilled. Food, health, that sort of thing. Then safety need comes next. The third level, so after your safety need is fulfilled, the third level is social belonging. That comes before self-esteem.
Wow.
So if you look at the fact that our kids are not sitting together and talking to each other, that they are not making these connections in these social stories, they are not feeling the social belonging, and you can't develop self-esteem because your brain continues to crave the social belonging. I also, and this is probably going to be the most hated answer, that is also because parents are also on their cell phones. If you think about how many times you go to a restaurant and you look at a family or my family and you see people on their cell phones at the dinner table with their entire family and not connecting. If you think about in the car rides where you used to not have a cell phone so you would actually have conversation with the adults in your life, those connections are not happening either. I was a coach. I coached for 13 years. There were even times when kids would perform in basketball games. They would look up to see if their parents saw, and their parents were on their cell phones. Those connections are also being missed. So I think the first thing to recognize is that if we are not plugging into each other, they are, no matter what is on that cell phone, they are not receiving a social, they're not getting that belongingness need met, and therefore they are not working on their self-esteem, and by not working on their self-esteem, their anxiety is growing. There is another chart, and I can't remember the name of it, but it talks about the way we were created, and I tried to get you to visualize. I talk. So people are, like, if you consider you're a circle of the people who are supposed to be of influence to you. So there's the inner circle, and that is your immediate family. The people that you see every day, your closest friends, your immediate family, that's supposed to be your strongest influence. You are supposed to be very influenced by them, and you are supposed to receive social belonging from them. Then there's the outer layer, which are the friends that you develop, and those are the friends you see often, and they are important. And each layer gets bigger, and the people who get more and more distance as far as their influence. The farthest layer is the layer of, I don't remember what all these layers are called, and I apologize. I tried to find it again, but I don't even remember the name of the chart. But the farthest layer of influence is the layer of people who know you, but you do not know them. They are supposed to have little to no influence except the fact that it makes you feel better when they know you. Social media has created that influence as real influence and sometimes more influential than the inner circles. And that is a level of discomfort that we were not created for, because that influence can never, there's no way to make real connections with that type of influence that is so far away from your center circle of intimacy.
Wow.
If that makes sense.
Absolutely. I know that I feel like we all know technology, internet plays a role in it, but I love how you specifically pinpointed those things, like how those social memories are essentially more important than your self-esteem. That was profound for sure. So thank you for that.
I'm sorry for taking
so
much time.
No, that's wonderful. That's what we're here for. So yeah, we'll continue that question. And other than maybe cell phones or extenuation of that, what else is playing to this role of increased anxiety and depression and behavioral disorders that we're seeing?
Sadly, I think part of what is perpetuating anxiety in our youth is the fact that we are now making it an identity rather than an issue to resolve. In other words, they're turning to the social media and they're seeing, well, I'm anxiety ridden, I have angst, so therefore I have an anxiety disorder, and now I can belong to these people who also have an anxiety disorder. And not that there's anything wrong with that. When you have anxiety and you connect with other people who have anxiety, that's great. But I think what's happening is so many things in young people's lives are being politicized. I was watching a speech that an elementary school child was giving. Maybe it was middle school. He was about 9. And he was saying that, this is a direct quote from him. He said, "My school has become a place where they promote activism instead of education." He said, "In an attempt to unify students, teachers are often creating unwarranted boundaries and barriers between students instead, pitting them against each other over characteristics they can't control. After years of pointing out our differences and how not to offend anyone, children have never noticed them more." So they're noticing their differences more. They're noticing things that make them feel anxious, like mental health. And now that they're noticing it more, when they go online and they see, this person has a label as, give me a label, anxiety disorder, then they are doing some self-labeling and things like that. So that's just a small part of what's going on social media. So that just adds to the fact that social media is a huge culprit for what's going on with our kids. The other thing is, like Karen said, when I look back in my memories as a kid with no phone, I made so many connections with my parents, with my sisters, because we played games. We made up really ridiculous, silly games in the car and everywhere.
Yes.
That's important to know. The other thing that's important to know is the reason I'm stumbling my words right now is I'm having anxiety because my child is walking around here somewhere and I don't know where he's gone. I keep occasionally seeing his head. Thank you. So anyway, but I think a lot of what's going on the news and a lot of the politicalization of schools is weighing really heavy on kids. We didn't used to really have those worries back when we were younger. That makes me sound so old, but and I think because we're missing those connections with our parents and we're getting influence from the outside world a lot more than we are from our inner circle, like Karen said, I think that our core character is starting to change. And I think that's making it very hard for some kids to figure out who they are. And they want to know their identity, and they don't need to know their identity yet. I like to say that when you're a kid and they're anxious about, well, I don't know who I am, you don't need to worry about that. This is your time to figure out who you can be, not who you are. So,
That's really
sorry for rambling a little, but I was watching him go back and forth.
That was very helpful. Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to that question? Okay. All right, we'll move on to our second question. So, oh, sure. Oh, okay. Let's see. Yeah.
Like, my kid's 6, so she can't really relate to social media. She doesn't know about it. She hardly has any tablet time. Like, I don't know how
That would play into that.
So
Great question.
one thing about that is also how much time when you're with her and when others are with her, the other adults in their life or the other older people, are they unplugged when other people are with her? Because that was, I think, one point when people hear that social media is the culprit, they automatically think it is 100% that the child being on social media. But I have had to start making myself, because my daughter's 4, so I've had to start making myself, because she'll remind me, Mommy, put your phone down. And I realize she's not seeing my eye-to-eye connection. She is not, because even when she's talking, I'll look down at a phone. Why am I doing that? Why am I doing that? Why am I looking at a Facebook or a game, or when my child is right there saying whatever it is she's saying? And so I think you want to, and I don't mean to be accusatory in any way. I assure you these are the things that I am trying to work hard to change in my own household. But they are as affected by the adults in their lives and their social media use as well. they are also affected by the kids around them. Even if she's 6 and not using a cell phone, are the other kids around her using their phones? The other thing to realize is, too, we have put access to the entire world in front of a child's brain. The adolescent brain, the children's brain, their prefrontal cortex, this part of their brain, their personality, that's not developed. That doesn't develop until, they used to say about 24 for a boy, 21 for a girl. That's when this is completely developed. They've changed that now. They've actually raised that number to closer to 28. So this prefrontal cortex is still developing. And what has happened is, with just the internet alone, or TV, or cable, or the constant access to everything that is possibly out there, kids are seeing things that their brain does not know how to understand. And so their brain has to make it make sense for their world, and what they have to kind of plug it into their knowledge. And they don't always understand that what they're seeing on the cell phone isn't next door. And so they can't always make sense of this, and so there's not enough protection on any, on all the devices, on all the screen time that we're putting, that kids are in front of. And so it's not always a kid on social media. There is so much more to be careful about with screen time in general.
As a parent, when you say we had the whole world, or children have the whole world at their fingertips, I think also as adults that affects us too. I felt myself, especially with my 1-year-old who's not really speaking yet, there's only so many times we can read moo, ba, la, 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 right? And so, we're like hour 2 into her wake time, and we've done everything we can, and I realized I was picking up my phone more than I wanted to be. So I gave up social media for Lent, hoping that would solve that. And I realized that wasn't even the issue. It's the grocery order that I'm doing online, my emails coming up, the text messages, I forgot to do this thing. It's like my entire life is on this phone, and I so quickly want to multitask and get everything done, and I forget, So I definitely understand that as well as a parent of trying to find that balance. I don't feel like, I'm not on Instagram all the time. I don't have an issue with my cell phone, but I realize I am, doing things that in my mind are productive or multitasking, but what is my daughter seeing the top of my head?
And we think we're multitasking.
Right.
But what we don't realize is the absence of that connection that we're missing. And I will tell you, as a teacher, one of the things that I've noticed is the struggle with the creative brain being developed. But creative brain develops during boredom. We don't let our kids get bored. And the phone and is one solution to that. But my sister talked about the games we used to make up. We made up those games because we were bored. We were outside where but we were bored, and we created some of the coolest games that and they entertained us. But so like one of the times where you create either storytelling, stories, memories, or inventions is when you are the most bored, and one of those times is driving in the car. But now what's happened is when we're in the car, children are plugged into music, they're even watching videos. Cars are now even built with a video screen built in so that you can turn on a movie instead of having that conversation time or that time where kids get bored or where you make up games. And so, it's just recognizing it's not necessarily the screen itself, it is the connection that they are continuing to seek.
Makes sense.
Another thing, you said your daughter's 6. There's a lot of natural anxiety for children and for teens, and usually at that age, that anxiety, that younger anxiety is, a lot of that is about the what's directly in front of them and the fears about their environment. As they get older, those anxieties turn inward toward things that are more about their own self-confidence and those sorts of things. And so, but there is some natural anxieties that kids will go through, and so.
Absolutely. Anything to
I
add?
was going to say, so I have a daughter that's 7, so I feel like we don't really relate so much to the social media aspect, but I will say that I feel like her anxiety has come from different things, like whether it's been losing a grandparent, like just the last year we lost a grandparent, or 2 years ago it was when my sister moved, so that was her cousins moving. So I feel like younger kids kind of experience anxiety in ways like that. I know especially when I have some kids in our program right now that they're in our four-year-old classroom, and they will be moving to kindergarten. And I already have one little boy that's like, I don't want to go. Like, I'm scared to go to school. And I think like those are kind of the more anxiety issues that I feel like I relate to, especially with the younger ones and especially with my daughter. So I think that is really what we experience. And I think as a mom, just constantly reassuring her, like, hey, like I know with her, like our big thing is like at drop off, like our separation, like it's just me and her. So we are like this, and I will admit I'm totally a helicopter mom. I like to say I'm not like, oh, she's fine, but I'm like, oh my gosh, are you okay? Like you bumped your head, you know, like oh my gosh, you did this. So I feel like those are kind of us, but I feel like reassuring her every day, like our big thing is some days I can't always pick her up due to my work schedule and her anxieties. Who's gonna get me? And there are some mornings, like this past Friday with the weather and everything, and I had appointments. I literally had to drop her off, and I was like, I'm not sure, but I promise you, like me or so-and-so, and I named 2 people who would come and get her, and letting her know, like, we will be here, like, you'll be picked up. So I think just constantly, even at, like, drop-offs or transitioning to a school, I knew whenever my daughter started, because she didn't go across the school at Eaton's, like, where all of her friends that she grew up from, the 2-year-old class up to the 5-year-olds. So for us, the things that I would do to kind of help that was, we went and looked at her school before we even, like, did a tour or anything. We just went and walked around. We went and looked at the playground, we played on it, we talked about this cool building, we talked about how we've been to church there before. So I think kind of doing these little things that to us are like, oh, this is so little, but that's what really kind of gave her that peace of mind. So reassuring your daughter, whether it's a change of going to school or, you know, like with her, she was leaving all of her friends. So she was like, I'm going to know nobody at this school, and she didn't know anybody. And I'm like, yeah, but you knew nobody when you came here, and look at all your friends, you know? So I think with the younger ones, it's more or less just reassuring them that even if it's like changes, which is what causes anxiety, I know in my young one, that it's okay, that we're here, that we're going to get through this together. And I always am letting her know, like, it's me and you, like, we got this. Like, I'm going to come get you. We're going to get picked up at the end of the day. Like, you're here, I'm here for you, you know? And I think just kind of reassuring them, like, you're going to make friends, you're going to be safe. I'm your safe place too. So I think that's kind of like the anxiety that probably is more things that you kind of probably experience with younger ones as well.
Great answer. Anyone else?
Can we move toward a little solution here?
Absolutely.
This is not with respect to the things that we've talked about, because there are an enormous number of distractions. But I'll tell you, when I dealt with anxiety-driven adults, the place we kind of had to start was with reparenting, in a sense. We had to help them understand their adult identity. Most of these were Christians that I was dealing with, and so I would try to help them understand 3 things: that they are accepted in Christ, that they're secure in Christ, that they're significant in Christ. Our children need to understand the same thing, but you don't have to say Christ. I mean, they need to know that they are accepted by you. They need to know that they are secure with you, and they need to know that they are significant to you. And kids are feelers. They have not figured out how to use their mind to analyze facts. They're going to go with how they feel about a situation, and they're going to make a determination about themselves or about you based upon how they feel. And so, the way we would do it with adults, we would say, okay, so Romans 12:2 says, don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And that's, they really needed to know how to transform their mind, because they needed to know what to believe, because their whole life was being driven by what they felt instead of what they believed. They were making their belief system based upon how they felt, as opposed to making their feelings a result of how they believed. And we have an opportunity with little children to help them do that from the beginning. We can, to make them feel accepted, well, you're going to be sure that they, and secure, you're going to be sure that they have this your attention, right? You're gonna when they begin to verbalize, you can actually help them to reinforce that by asking them, tell me 2 or 3 people who really love you. And if you're not in that list, well, then you need to give some thought to that. But more to the point, though, is to ask them something along the lines of, how do you know that you're loved by them? And they'll usually they can give you one or two things that they know that spoke to them. My son, when he was about 3, I guess, my oldest son, I asked him that question, who loves you? And he said, I did. He said, Daddy loves me. I said, how do you know that I love you? He said, because you play rough with me. And he was right. I mean, we did bronco horses, we did baseball at 3 years old. I mean, we were rough playing, but that's what spoke to him. It was just some time that we spent together. He's an extrovert, and so that says something about how he learns and how he evaluates things. His brother, his younger brother, is an introvert. And I'm going to give you an example of how that relates. I mean, because you got to kind of know your kid, right? So when my oldest was 13 and the twins were 10, my wife and I took the 3 of them, and we were going to drop our daughter off at a birthday party with her friends. And just before we got there, the boys started teasing her about something, and I felt like it probably hurt her feelings. And she got out of the car, went to her friends, and I turned around and read the boys the riot act, right? I really gave it to them, and I said, when you get home, I want you to go to your room, and I want you to explain to me why I'm upset with you. Well, the 10-year-old, who's the introvert, goes in and he writes down, he doesn't know how to articulate why I'm upset with him, but he says, I messed up, so we spent some time talking about that. And the 13-year-old, he wrote down, because Dad got up on the wrong side of the bed this morning. I mean, literally, that's what he wrote, and so we had to talk about that. And what he explained to me was that we're brothers and sisters. We pick on each other. There's no problem with that, And so from his point of view, what I had said made no sense and made no difference to him. If I was wrong from his point of view. It'll be interesting if you're paying attention to your children, the ones that are introverted, they tend to analyze themselves and they tend to judge themselves. And they're busy looking for that label to help them know who they are, and they're looking for people who they can identify with. Unfortunately, none of those people can give them a solution, and that's a real problem with those sites. The extroverts tend to analyze the people around them and make judgments about the people around them. And so I'm pretty sure that my oldest was looking forward to when he was 18 and away from home, because then he wouldn't have to deal with me and his mom anymore, right? So it's just part of the solution here is you got to spend time with your kids. You got to get to know them. You got to realize they're emotion-driven, and then you've got to get them to, as you can, get opportunities to work with them, to talk with them, to get to know them, and to understand what they believe about truth, whatever that truth is. And then the younger the better you start with this, is to get them to verbalize truth. That you're always going to be there for them. Doesn't matter what they do, you're going to be there. Whether their opinions agree with you or not, it doesn't matter. We're going to understand your opinions, okay? And if they get a chance, you can share your own opinions with them. But that's kind of how I think about this, kind of reverse engineering the problem from an adult looking backwards to what happened with those people and what could have made a difference in their life if their parents had recognized the difficulties they were having and tried to help resolve them.
That's helpful. So I'm hearing from Kayla and Ken that just giving that time to really, no matter how your child's age, just to speak with them, talk through everything that's going to happen they're anxious about, asking them how they feel is really important. Personal experience, I see that already. My oldest is a 2-year-old and was crying every time we pulled into the doctor's office. And one time he was only 2. I really thought it was a waste of time, to be honest, but we talked through everything that was going to happen and went over it and over and over it. Honestly, probably 15 times reviewed it because it was a 30-minute drive. And then the first thing they did was different than what we had reviewed because it's different than it. And I was like, oh no, here we go. And he was okay. And I was so stunned. But after hearing you all, it's making more sense. We took the time to talk about it, and I think by the time we talked through it, he was secure. So it's baffling that even at 2 years old, that investment of time and going over those routines and asking, do you feel secure? Do you know that I love you? How do you know? That seems really helpful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think you convinced him that he was secure with you. That's the deal, is he knew he was special.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. You have a question? Mm. Mm. Absolutely. So just to repeat the question for our streaming, how do we deal with external factors that are beyond our control? Is that the best way, would you say that? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Absolutely.
The first thing is to validate his feelings. So how many people, including me, have tried this one? Well, don't worry, or calm down. That never works. Both of those phrases are kind of us telling our child, don't have feelings. So the first thing is to validate. And that we use CBT, which is called Cognitive Behavioral Therapy. And basically what they teach is for you to say, instead of saying, well, don't worry about it, or who cares what they think, because they do care what others think. So you validate and you say, man, that must be really tough to hear that. That would hurt my feelings too. So you validate. And then the second thing that you do is you say, I'm here to listen. And then you can ask them to go through a whole list of different calming techniques. Exercise is wonderful for anxiety. I like to teach my kids how to hot chocolate breathe. And that's where you pretend you're holding a cup of hot chocolate, and it's steaming, that chocolatey smell. And so you have to breathe it in, but it's still too hot to drink, so you have to blow it off. And that just gets little kids to start understanding how to use breathing techniques to help them with their anxiety. And then the third thing, I think, goes right along with what you guys were saying, which is remind them that if you're somebody who is religious, remind them that God is with them, and that it's more important what He thinks. And I know that's not a quick fix. It's not going to be something that a kid is going to be in the middle of crying. Everybody at school's mad at me, and you say, well, God loves you. They're going to be like, that's not what I'm talking about right now. But at the same time, it's going to sink in. It's going to get in there and become part of their foundation, and that's going to make them stronger. I wanted to, I guess, quote one of my favorite comedians. He was talking about the whole validation thing. His name's Brian Regan. And he was talking about when a kid loses a balloon that you just bought them, and the first thing and they lose their mind, the balloon flies off and they're like, and the parents are like, why are you acting like that? Stop that. You are out of control. That is crazy talk. You are being nuts. And Brian Regan says, well, what if that was your wallet that just started floating away all of a sudden? You'd be like, I need that. And people would be like, don't worry about it, we'll get you another one. And you're like, I want that one, it has all my money in it. It's that important and big to a child. So understanding that things are big to them and that we can't just say, no, don't feel that way. That we need to validate, listen, and then get into the solution somehow.
So you took a lot of my thunder there. One of the biggest things is validating emotions, because they are an emotional brain. And this was brand new to me as I was doing research for this. I always knew that when I get into emergency brain, my prefrontal cortex shuts off, and my brain goes into a logical brain. So you may have noticed when your kid does something and you're in emergency brain because you're trying to take care of them, you are so much calmer than after you realize they're okay. I was in a car wreck one time, and I called my husband. I was still in emergency brain, and I called him, and I was like, hey, I have hit the wall on the interstate, and I'm sitting on, and then my brain started going back to normal because I knew I was safe, and so my emotional brain started turning itself on. So my phone call went, so I'm sitting on the interstate, and I'm here by the wall, right past Watt Road, and I'm turned the wrong way, and I am... And so, like, you could hear my message as my emergency brain shut off and my emotions came in. That's the adult brain. What I did not realize is when children go into emergency brain, when they are in trauma, because they don't have, their prefrontal cortex is not as developed. So when they go into emergency brain, it is their logic that shuts off. They are 100% in emotion brain. I am very guilty of trying to logic my child out of her own separation anxiety, which is one of her biggest deals. I am very guilty of trying to logic her out of this. Her logic brain is shut off. It is the same as just throwing paper into fire. It is burning up and there's nothing happening. So I have to deal with the emotional brain. I have to speak to her in an emotional way. As to your specific point about your child who is facing something that not everybody else is facing, before you can even deal with self-confidence, I would deal with belonging and start thinking about places where he can go, whether it's, I know that Knoxville has a wheelchair basketball community, and you'll see they'll come through. I know we went to a wheelchair basketball game in Atlanta, and it was not only it was very motivational, but it was also there are communities where he can become a part of that. There are places where he can find that belongingness need where it's unquestioned, and perfect. Good for you. Yeah.
Right.
Good. Right. Yeah, and some of that is children's angst, and some of that is exactly what, and he's going to go through things that a lot of us won't ever understand because he's going to, but to work on the self-esteem, he's got to have that belongingness first, and so good for you for doing that. You're doing a great job. Getting him where he can find those real core belonging, social belonging, and that's huge. That's so important for him. So and as that moves, then he can start moving, and it's going to take a hit. Those ideas are going to take a hit. So we've kind of jumped ahead to solutions.
Right.
So I did one thing that I have in my classroom. I have first of all, I have fidgets. My kids come in, walk in the classroom, they get a fidget that they like. But I also have I have anxiety baskets. And I'm figuring more and more out what goes in those anxiety baskets. So when I have about 6 kids right now who use those anxiety baskets on kind of a regular basis. And in the anxiety basket, when they feel it doesn't do them any good when they're at the height of a panic attack, but when they're feeling it coming on, an anxiety basket has something for each sense. So something that they can feel, something that they can, something that is, that they can look at, something that they can smell. Like I have some, they suggested like the scratch and sniff stickers, but my kids are middle school, so I really just use like the essential oils, and they can just kind of open it up and smell those things. Something that they can touch and or hear makes a sound. So it reaches all their senses. But then I also put in pinwheels for them to blow, for them to work on their deep breathing, and I put in squish balls for them to work on their muscle, to try and get their muscles to relax. Or I put in, one of my kids goes directly for the one that has silly putty, because it's, it helps the muscle relaxing. And so when I have kids who are, especially, like I said, I've got about 5 or 6 who use these regularly, and they know which one they like. They know which one they want. So we keep those baskets, I keep those baskets in the back of my room, and sometimes they'll go and just grab one, and they'll just use the things that are there and kind of do their own self, to try and keep themselves down from going all the way up the mountain of anxiety, get to a full-blown panic attack.
So that kind of brings me to another question that actually you brought up before we began. So, we've talked especially with children, they're emotional beings, right? And so they're going to show anxiety more often. So at what point do we need to be concerned that this is typical for a child experiencing these symptoms? And maybe also, what are those symptoms? And then the next question would be, at what point do we need to be concerned and seek resources, professional help of these anxiety symptoms? Where would you all see that need to need more support, more professional support?
I can speak for high school kids.
Sure.
I'm not an expert with little people. But for high school kids, when that anxiety is so intense that it's debilitating, that they really can't function, then we got a problem. And I would encourage them to uncover what it is that they're afraid of. And what if it's coming before the class, and you can't get the book report out, or you can't do your presentation because you're so very anxious. What is it about that's causing that uncomfortable feeling? And very often, if they can identify, well, I want to please this person or that person, maybe that'll go away. But if they can't function, or they're ill, they're having stomach problems, they're having headache problems, then it's time to get some help. I also think, can I say something?
Absolutely, yeah.
I also think that with high school kids, I talk mostly juniors. Juniors are very anxious about college applications, whether or not they're going to have the grades to do what they want to do. And there are times when the thing that's making them so very, very anxious is the expectation that they perceive from home. And whether it's real or not, I want to please mom and dad. I've got to have A's. I can't bring home a B. And so if we can understand that, what's the worst thing that can happen? If you get a B, is it going to really be that bad? Is it going to change anything about your application process? I think can be very helpful. To kids. The other thing, and you had it in one of your notes, is to write things down. I think that keeping a journal, diary, call it whatever, looking back on that daily account and seeing those problems that seem to be such huge obstacles yesterday or last week, and noting that, in fact, the person was able to get over it, and how, can be very comforting to, they were successful.
Right.
They managed it. And so I would encourage journaling or diaries or that kind of thing. And parents, we have to make a promise that we don't read them. The child has to understand that that's a major paper and nobody else. And I think it's helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. Any other explanations as well, or that point of where we think this is beyond just calming tips or mindfulness or journaling? At what point do we think that this is something serious that we really need to get help here for?
I have parents that bring children to me who are having a lot of trouble sleeping, who are having trouble eating, who are having a lot of physical manifestations of their anxiety. Because anxiety can cause physical sensations, lump in the throat, chest pain. It can cause profuse sweating. it can cause a stutter. So there are a lot of things that parents are seeing. Really, an outburst is just anxiety with no coping skills. So if you're seeing lots and lots of outbursts, what you're learning is, oh, my child doesn't know any other coping skills. So that's when all the stuff that we've been talking about comes into play, the hot chocolate breathing, journaling, and all that kind of stuff. But first you have to know there's a problem to offer the solution. So I think looking for things like, if they are constantly coming up with excuses not to go to school, if they are always hesitating about going to bed, maybe there's a fear of the dark issue, maybe there's a fear of bad dreams, nightmares. If they won't go upstairs unless everybody else is upstairs, they don't want to be downstairs if the rest of the family's upstairs. So if you look for those things kind of as they accumulate, you're going to see that it's a little bit more than just the natural angst of childhood.
Absolutely, thank you. Well, it's 3:54, so let's do this. I know as you came in, you all got some paper to write down some questions. If you're more comfortable writing your questions instead of speaking them, you can write those right now and place them in the basket, and we'll take about 5 to 10 minute break once we see everyone back in here. So feel free to use the restroom, write down some questions, grab some more cookies and drink, and then we'll reconvene with those questions to make sure everyone feels heard and we answer everything that you'd like to hear today. Thank you all so much. We'll take a quick break. Be sure to drop those questions in the back basket. Perfect. Thank you. little clumsy now. It wasn't quite a catch. Let's see, now I've got this ripped out. Barely. Alrighty there. Sorry to get your eardrums going there. We are going to go ahead and reconvene. Thank you so much for your wonderful questions. So this portion of our panel here, we're going to ask the questions that you all wrote. So we'll go through these here. We have about 6. And then after that, if there are any other lingering questions, feel free to raise your hand as you have and share those questions with us. Oh, whoops, one more. So sorry about that. I moved the basket, so I made that confusing. No, that's wonderful. Thank you. All right, so we will go ahead and get started. Our first question from our participants here is, are there differences between anxiety and depression? Does one usually come before the other? And can you have one and not the other?
You definitely can have one and not the other. There are 7 different types of anxiety disorders. There's generalized anxiety disorder, social phobia, simple phobia, agoraphobia, and some more that I can't think of right now. Yeah, I read it at the end. Those are all separate from depression. However, a lot of times because you have this anxiety disorder that makes you feel so uncomfortable and you start doing things that are enjoyable to you less often, you do end up getting depressed because of the anxiety. So most of the time what I've seen is that the anxiety will come first and that the depression will come very closely after. But they are very often hooked.
So one question that we did not address that was on our list of questions, we talked about it a little bit, that I think goes along with this, is kind of some of the symptoms to look for. Wait, that's not where I was going with this. Tell me what you just said again. Just let one of them. Yeah, one of you.
So we're speaking on can anxiety exist without depression, or how are they linked? So once again, are there differences between anxiety? Got it? Okay.
Misconceptions. It was
Perfect. Misconceptions.
So one of the things that, as a parent, that I was missing, or not as a parent, but just in general working with kids, that I assumed all depression looked like sadness. And it took me dealing with several people and there are people whose depression looks like sadness, but I have discovered, especially in teenagers, depression looks like anger. And it is very often that those kids who are dealing with those high anxiety and depression, sometimes they're very difficult to work through because they just come at you so angrily. And it is really hard to continue to keep your emotions in check. So one of the things that I'd forgotten that I really wanted to say was, as a parent, if you know your child is getting ready to go into something that usually creates their own anxiety or raises their anxiety level or is a trigger for them, one of the things we spend a lot of time trying to prepare our kids for what's about to come, and we forget to prepare ourselves for our own emotions. That you may get angry when your child, and then you're going to feel guilty because you got angry because your child's yelling at you, but we forget to prepare ourselves because sometimes it doesn't feel good when they're coming at you and you're being logical and you're right and they're coming at you, and it is very hard to put yourself in their shoes, like you're saying, and remember that balloon meant a lot to them. And so one thing I wanted to encourage was preparing yourself for your own emotions, number 1, and then number 2, also keep in mind, depression doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes, and especially in teens, it looks angry. It looks very angry.
Thank you. That actually perfectly segues, I believe, into another question we have here about preparing. I wrote it, so I don't have to read it. But so what can we do as parents to help prepare ourselves in the middle, when our child or teen is in the middle of an anxious episode? What can we do to prepare for those emotions so that we are the rock and the solace we need?
I'm going to tell you about a time I failed miserably at doing that. It was yesterday. all the way back then. So my son has some issues with anxiety, some OCD tendencies, some different things like that. And so I'm always telling him, try get into the solution, be positive, look at the positive side, and all that kind of stuff. And it was rubbing off on him, because one time I was mad at the washing machine that wouldn't work, and I slammed the lid, and he came running in, and he said, "Mommy, what's the matter?" And I said, "The washing machine." And he said, "It's okay. You're safe. You're in this house. You have Daddy here. You have me. And you also still have the dryer."
That is true.
I was like, man, he's listening. He's getting it. And then yesterday, I erased everything I had taught him by acting myself like a child. I was trying to get a kite to go. That wind was crazy yesterday, so I thought, no problem, kite. Could not get that kite to fly. And so I marched off, and I was like, no, I'm done, I'm leaving. And I left the area with my son yelling behind me, "You're acting like me." But my advice is to focus on the positive as much as possible and help your children focus on the positive and to be solution focused. That would be my two biggest pieces of advice, because we all know the problem. If you sit and you dwell in the problem and you just keep rehashing the problem, so if you ask the child over and over, "Tell me why this bothers you so much, what's going on, blah, 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 blah," they're going to stay in the problem. What I like to say is, okay, we know the problem, let's get into the solution. Be solution focused, and also adopt a playful attitude, not so much so that you're completely discounting the seriousness of the situation, but so that you can also bring some humor and levity into it and say just lighten the mood a little bit.
One of the things I think you have to do is, if we could figure out how to do this exactly right, we would compartmentalize it so that we understand that we're there to listen now, as opposed to fix or to correct. I had this situation where I knew that my oldest was really unhappy with me, and I kind of had an idea of why, and so I spent a lot of time arguing with God about it, because I knew exactly what my son was going to say. At least I felt like I did, and I knew how it was going to affect me, and I knew that he was wrong. But so God and I just fought about it for a long time, because I needed to get those emotions out so that I could separate myself from the problem, because I knew I was going to hear hard things from him that I didn't believe, and I didn't think he had actually thought through properly. And but I needed to be in a position to just listen and take it, so he could get it off his chest, because until he gets it off his chest, he doesn't have a chance to think it through. He doesn't have a chance to look at another side or another perspective, because there's so much energy that he needs to convey or to do something with, to unload this burden that he's carrying. And some people are better at compartmentalizing than others, and I'm not very good at it. I want to defend my position. I want to show him that he's wrong and that here's what's right, and if he would just do what's right, we'd all be better off. But that has never, ever worked very well for anyone. So you got to release your stuff before you get a chance, before they show up. To the extent you understand what the stuff is that's coming, but it's almost never going to be emotionally pleasant for you. So isolate your brain in that area so that you're focused on understanding what they're saying.
So as a parent or a caregiver, stopping and listening, not ready to solve, listening to what it is, even if it is hard to listen to, and then focusing on the resolution. That was new to me too, because I think I like to delve into that problem. So what was, so that's helpful as well. So focusing on how the solution, I should say, of how we should solve that. And any other advice on that?
So one thing, when you go into your discussion with your kid, and this is, I've learned most of this in the school setting, to know your purpose for the discussion. So as you go into the discussion, one of the things that I have discovered as a teacher is that I can't go into a discussion, do I want to punish the kid for the thing that he did wrong, or do I want to change the behavior? Because I can't always do both. And if I'm going into the discussion and I'm angry and I feel like this kid deserves to be punished, then maybe, that's a different discussion versus changing the behavior. Sometimes changing the behavior is the goal. And sometimes that doesn't always look like a kid being punished. I will say that I know, and this has worked with our kids a lot, I made a really big change in my classroom, and then I brought it home, and it's immense how big a difference this has made. Because one thing that kids have a lot of anxiety over, especially Cameron, is this fear of getting in trouble. They're terrified to get in trouble. They are scared to death of getting in trouble, and they hate getting in trouble. And I noticed that my kids would walk out of the classroom saying that they got in trouble with me because I moved them to a different seat, or because I told them to stop talking. They're like, well, then I got in trouble. No, you did not. You did not get in trouble. And so I had a discussion with my kids at the very beginning of the year. There is a massive difference between in trouble and behavior correction. If I ask you to stop talking, there doesn't even need to be a discussion because you're not in trouble. I'm just correcting a behavior that can't continue in order for me to continue a class. And if the behavior is corrected, we move on with our lives, and it's never even remembered that I asked you to stop talking because you didn't get in trouble. If I'm writing things down or calling other people in or giving a consequence, then you got in trouble. And so I had so in the classroom, there are times that I'll tell the kid, I'll be like, hey, stop talking, and they'll want to tell me I wasn't the one talking, and I'm like, I don't care. I just want the behavior corrected. And if I told you to stop talking, the kid next to you who was the one talking, he stopped. And that is all that I care about, and nobody got in trouble. I didn't write anything down. And so I've gotten to where I'll tell my kids all the time, you're not in trouble, this is behavior correction. And when I get onto a kid who's not in my class, they'll tell that kid, they'll be like, dude, just stop. You're not in trouble, she's just correcting your behavior. And I'm like,
Wow.
okay, this is working.
Yeah.
And that's happening with my daughter and my nephew as well. I'll say something and they'll say, is this behavior correction or am I in trouble? Like, is there a consequence? No. It's behavior correction. And they know that if they just stop the behavior, there's not going to be an in trouble. And that has made a massive difference because one of the things that I've noticed with anxiety is secretism. They get very, very secretive because they're terrified they're going to get in trouble. And if we can just recognize behavior correction doesn't lead to in trouble. Let's just correct the behavior, and then there's nothing. We're just moving on with our lives. And that's been very, very helpful. And I think I've jumped topics a lot, but I wanted to make sure that I brought that in because that was a huge difference in behavior management in my classroom and with my kids.
That's wonderful. I think that kind of actually, jumping a little bit as well, kind of goes along. Kayla and I were discussing the trend of gentle parenting and how there's, a bit of a misconception sometimes that gentle parenting can be no boundaries or on the, the other end of we're so afraid of having our kids be in trouble all the time. I think that's gold in that, you can be gentle and kind, and this is just behavior. I'm here to help you. This is help. This isn't I'm mad at you or I resent you right now or I'm frustrating you. I think that's great for a child to hear, especially as I would say a recovering people pleaser, but definitely still a people pleaser. I was always afraid if my teacher asked me to be quiet, it would weigh on me honestly for a week.
And you thought you were in trouble.
Yes.
You felt like you were
Yes.
in trouble. And so that creates anxiety too, though. Because
Absolutely.
as a child, you're sitting in there in class, and you have the nervousness. You are nervous about being in trouble by someone you respect. And so this idea of just because I've said something to you, all I'm doing is correcting a behavior that I can't continue class if you're doing this behavior.
Right.
And if that stops, we're done. The world, I still love you. I still, that we move on. And that took away that anxiety of I'm going to get in trouble if I do this, or if I get caught. It's more if I get caught. It doesn't always stop the behavior, but they are anxious about getting caught.
Sure, excellent. Thank you. All right, we'll move on to our next question here. What do you do whenever your teenager or young adult refuses counseling, medication, and doesn't want to read any helpful material on anxiety, stress management? That's a great question. Go for it.
So I've definitely had the reluctant patient or two come to my practice, and what I've done is put aside all therapy talk and just played. I do a lot of play therapy, and I get to know the child by playing with them and then just kind of throwing in some therapeutic questions here and there. So sometimes if somebody really is averse to therapy and CBT and DBT and those technical, and all of that kind of stuff, just play with them. Play is so therapeutic, and you can actually play therapeutic games, activities that are designed to help them learn how to reduce anxiety, activities that are designed to build self-esteem, activities that are designed to build connection. And you can do that just one-on-one. You can do that with the whole family. It's super important, because the opposite really of disobedience is not obedience exactly, it's connection. When you connect with your child, you're going to see disobedience drop and anxiety drop in a huge way. No. I have no idea what I just said. Oh, the opposite of disobedience isn't always necessarily obedience, it's connection. If you want your child to feel safe and secure, then if you have a genuine connection with them where you guys are talking, and that leads to a question that I had that I didn't give you, I'm sorry, about how do we talk to our kids about very difficult things. This question is specifically about divorce, parents getting a divorce. How do you tell your child that? And that is so very, very difficult to do. And I hate to sound cliche, but in all honesty, it's honesty. Being honest with the child, but also maintaining very good boundaries as far as what you tell them.
Right.
So being honest, like, yes, things are going to look different, and I know that's going to be hard for you. But then getting into actual details, no. When a parent breaks boundaries with a child, that makes them very anxious. So if you're telling them things that they're not of an age to understand, or it's not their business, should be just between the adults, that makes a child very anxious. It's a heavy burden to carry, to know that your dad thinks your mom is whatever. So you want to maintain really good boundaries, but at the same time, you want to be honest with them and upfront and answer every single question that they have, and also sit and listen to their anger and to their sadness. And the whole reason I've been looking at my phone up here is because I have stuff on here we're not just up here texting each other. But I really like this saying. Discipline is helping a child solve a problem. Punishment is making a child suffer for having a problem. In order to raise problem solvers, focus on the solution, not retribution. So one of the ways to get a child who might not want to come to therapy to think, well, maybe it's a good idea. Instead of talking about you've got all these problems and you need help, what you can say is, wouldn't it be cool to get in the solution and find out new things that you can do and different ways that you can heal? And make it kind of that way instead of let's focus on what's wrong with you.
Would you all recommend that? I noticed this question says teenager and young adult. So, with play therapy, that may be more difficult for an older teen. So, or you think so? No? Are there? Okay, excellent. That's what kind of games?
They miss it.
Okay.
They miss it. That is one of the biggest mistakes our education system is making today. Not that we're supposed to get there, but they miss play. They miss playtime. We were created to learn through the act of play and storytelling. That's the best way to teach a kid something. So they love, you have to change the games.
Right.
You can't still play duck, duck, goose.
Right.
Every now and then they kind of still like it. But no, they love play.
Excellent.
They love play. They love creating things. it is, and I think it's a huge mistake as parents to stop playing. I'll give a quote. She gave her quotes. I'll give mine. We don't grow old. We don't stop playing because we grow old. We grow old because we stop playing. And we have somehow decided that our kids don't need to play unless it's an organized sport or it's on a device. And that is that's such a mistake. Kids have got to play. Adults have to play. We need to play. You know, it is, but yes, play therapy. You change the games to match their development, but absolutely continue to play as much as possible.
I'd just like to give an example of how that's true. My youngest son, who's 30 now, as I said, he has some anxiety issues, and they have plagued him all of his life since probably the moment of birth. I mean, he went from colic to anxiety. So, but we have he lives here in town, and so every Friday night we have dinner where we invite him to either our house or to my mother-in-law's house to have dinner. Well, this past Christmas, my oldest son gave my wife and my mother-in-law a 2,000-plus piece Lego set to build a lighthouse. And they looked at that like, oh my God, what are we going to do with that? Who can we give that to that would enjoy it? Well, what we decided to do was we would let our 30-year-old teach us how to do Lego on a major scale. And so last Friday after dinner, we pulled out the box and it's got I think it has 15 bags, different bags of Legos. The instruction book is actually 2 books, and each one's 120 pages long. And he took the first 2 bags and taught my mother-in-law and my wife how to build a Lego set. They enjoyed, and the entire time they talked about everything under the sun. Now, unbelievable. My wife was almost in tears afterwards because she'd had such a conversation with him. Wow. And he was thrilled. I told him the next day that his mom was really excited and that she might not ever do any more bags until he shows up for dinner again. And his response was, I was going to ask her not to put it together because I want to do it with you guys every week.
Wow.
So, there's a breakthrough here. It's just waiting to happen.
Right.
But I think the idea of playing and kids and adults, we really need to learn how to enjoy it ourselves again.
So one first step, especially with teenagers as a parent, would be just connecting and engaging in something fun and being together, and that can be the first step to help battle anxiety. Excellent. That's really helpful.
Unplug when you do it.
Unplug, absolutely. I'll work on that. Thank you. Any other ideas on how to help engage a teen or young adult that battles anxiety as well? All right, we'll move on to our next question here. What about the effect of things like school shootings, et cetera? What is the best way to handle and talk to your kids about these things? So these things that are out of our control, that are all over the news, that make us very anxious. Where do we start to help our children that are hearing these things because of the news and social media? How do we battle that?
I was in class when 9/11 happened, and it happened to be our journalism class. So part of what we did was watch the morning. There was a morning news program for kids on at that time, but they actually watched the towers fall, and you can imagine how they felt. We have been at the high school. We had lockdowns with some regularity. And my answer to them, and I'm thinking of different situations, and I see April, and I know that you can remember some really terrible things that happened. A student who had committed a murder and eventually committed suicide, and we were all in lockdown waiting for the outcome. So they were all upset. I mean, these are 16, 17, some of them were 18 years old in that particular class. And you think that, the older kids aren't going to be upset. Yeah, they're upset. But what they could know was that we had prepared. We knew what we were going to do. We had a plan. Everybody had a plan, and that's what we can control. We couldn't control anything else. but if we followed our plan, we were gonna be okay. And I said to them, and by legally, at the time, I was like their parent. And as your parent, I'm not gonna let anything happen to you. We're gonna lock the doors, and anybody who comes in here is going to have to come through me first. And whatever that's worth, it was a bit comforting to them. Now, could we control what was going on outside? No. And can they control what the environment is going to be when they get to school? No. But they can be prepared.
Focus on what you can control. That's excellent.
Exactly.
So this is a huge difference. I started teaching in 2000, so I was also in the classroom when it happened, and my kids also watched. Through the years, we started doing, because that wasn't long after Columbine. And through the years, we started doing the drills for these different types of things. A few years ago, we were in a lockdown drill, and one of them, I was talking to the kids, and one of my kids said, well, my dad said, he owns a store just down the road, and my dad said, if we ever have to escape because there's a shooter, we can all go to his store. Now that sounds great, but here's what I started crying because my kids are having discussions at the dinner table with their parents about what happens if a shooter comes in, and they are thinking about that, and that broke my heart. So what I'm going to say makes very little sense in some ways. I do think the drills are important because we have to know what we're doing. But other than that, the kids need to, because in the end, when those moments, if that moment ever happens, we will go into our emergency brain and they will go into theirs, and we will be the ones who are trying to logic their way out of it. So they will not be in the same emergency brain that logics their way out of that school. So we need to know what we're doing. They need to have a basic idea, but other than that, they need to be on the page of, it's probably not going to happen here. We probably don't, because the more they think about it, the more that anxiety is going to be a problem. And they need to know that we know. They need to know that we have a plan. They need to know what the plan is for the most part. And they do need to know that I told my kids, like when we get to go into drill, my kids have something in their hand to throw. I'm like, listen, get a book, get a chair, don't just anything but a small child. We could throw anything else. And if the door opens, we're throwing something. Because not only does that give them a feeling of control, it's actually a better idea than just hiding. So, because if people are throwing things at you, your first reaction is this. But other than that, they don't need to know that it doesn't need to be a constant worry for them. It can be a constant worry for me. I'm the adult.
Right.
So, and it is, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I feel like with social media and internet, that stuff's inundated. Even for young kids, you're still hearing about, all of these things a lot more than we would, 20 years ago. So that makes sense that they're hearing it so much, it's building. So keeping it at a minimum to where, and then focusing on that control. That's great. Thank you. Any other responses on that? All right, we'll head to our next question. How about some appropriate advice for medication? So what age or at what point would you all, would you think that medication's appropriate for anxiety?
Okay, I'll go. So you can't really diagnose certain disorders before certain ages.
Okay.
Anxiety and depression are one of those, or two of those disorders that you and bipolar, borderline, if you've heard any of those personality disorders, there is a certain age level that each one, it's a little gray. I mean, it's not a specific age, like at 3 you can diagnose this, but most of the time clinicians will not diagnose anybody with anxiety or depression at a very, very young age. It's rare, I think. Do you agree or disagree?
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and my view on medication is and it's a personal view also, it's both a professional view and a personal view, is that depression and anxiety kind of digs you in a hole or puts you in a hole, and there's no way to get out. You can't claw your way out. There's just no way out. So I feel like medication provides a ladder. You still have to climb it and do the work and work on yourself and learn coping skills, but you at least now have something that's helping you get out of absolute despair and helping you get rid of some of those physical symptoms that don't allow you to come out of anxiety and get into the solution. So I do feel that medication can be very helpful. I'm also, very skeptical sometimes of it as well. So I don't have a really clear idea of what the best option is, because of course it's different for each person. But I do believe that in some cases, I would 10 times rather have my child on medication than not have them on medication and have them be suicidal. So if medication is what it's going to take for a little while, I'm all for it.
And hearing, especially when you mention, once again, those physical symptoms, when that's affecting your everyday life, or they're just kind of in a point where it just feels like they can't on their own use those coping skills, that's a point when we need to head that direction. Okay, it's helpful.
And I have talked to students who want to go to therapy, but their parents are making, and I'm going to go ahead and call it a mistake, of saying, "Oh, you're fine. You'll get over it. You're just being dramatic." And so, the thing of it is that, and this would be my advice to parents in general, if your child needed glasses, you would not just tell them to try harder to see better. You're not trying hard enough, just try harder. You would give them glasses. And the fact is, I've never believed in try harder anyway, or I don't believe in try harder anyway, because I don't even know what that is. I think that you have to try different. It's another conversation I have with my students a lot about, there's no such thing as try harder. You have to try different. You have to figure out what the thing is that you have to try different. And if the try different is speaking to a counselor, try it. If the try different is medication, try it. You cannot force your child to try harder their way out of anxiety or depression.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about it is I think I shared for a long time the notion of as a Christian we didn't need medications for that sort of thing. But what I came to understand was that there are really a lot of chemistry things that go on in a person who's anxious. And sometimes it shows up in an ulcer in their stomach, and sometimes I think there's a brain chemistry thing that goes on. And if you don't have some kind of medication to help raise them to that level where they can have a conversation, then they're not even in the fight. The medication will often allow you and them to engage to a point where you can battle whatever it is that they're battling together that they could never do by themselves or without that medication. I've always kind of had as my goal is we want to get past the medication, but if it allows us to engage, then by all means, and they just need a good, and this is always the issue, of course, is finding the right kind of doctor or psychiatrist or psychologist who will work with you so that you're sharing the same goal when you're working with a young person or even an adult for that matter.
Right. Excellent. Thank you all. All right, we'll move to our next question here. Any tips on transitioning from middle school to high school? There's so much pressure to decide career paths, and as the students are entering high school. So let's talk a little bit about that focused anxiety of the school transitions, especially when you've got so many major life decisions on your plate there.
It is a huge transition from middle school to high school. Certainly the students who are given an opportunity to go to high school, or they have been, I don't know what goes on now, but usually the middle school team will take the children to the high school, and so they walk around and they have an opportunity to see where things are, learn their way around the building. It's a big building. But besides all that, just becoming familiar with the building itself, you know, I would encourage kids to be themselves. Oftentimes, folks from middle school to high school try to be somebody that they think will fit in better, and it doesn't work. Be themselves. Be quiet. Be quiet and learn what that environment is, and find your own way.
Makes sense. I remember as college, my favorite thing about college is I felt like you could have that freedom and didn't feel that thing to fit in. So I wish I could go back and tell my high school self that that really is beneficial. But it sounds so cliche when you are in high school. So that really is gold there. It really is.
So I teach 8th grade, and we do still take a tour of the high school, and that's super helpful. I actually kind of wish we did it a little bit earlier in the year, and I also wish we did more to where we connected more with the high school, that we did more things where we connected more with the high school. That's something that we as teachers, I think, need to push for more. So the number one indicator of high school success is not your child's academics in middle school. It is not. It is the number one indicator of high school success is finding something that where your kid belongs, being involved in something, whether it's band or sports or a creative activity or a club. So the number one thing that I would do is I would find out about every club in the high school. Find out what all the clubs are, what are all the activities, what are all of the electives that they're interested in and excited about. And that's got to become the focus. If the kids get to high school, encourage involvement, not over-involvement, because I think one of the things that is leading to some of our anxiety also is that sports don't have a season anymore. If your kid is in baseball, your kid is in baseball year-round. If your kid is in soccer, your kid is in soccer year-round, and that is stressful. That is stressful. And if your kid's super athletic, they want to be involved in all of it. And so you don't want them to be over-involved, but you want them to try until they find their thing. Try until they find their place. They need to have, and I know I keep preaching belonging, but for kids, it is so important. So find out what it is they can do and give them the option. If they sign up for something, they have to finish it. But when they finish what they signed up for, they don't have to stick with it as long as they try something new. Because that may not be their thing. If they try theater, they may not love theater. If they try soccer, they may not love soccer, but let them keep trying something new until they find their thing. And, and that includes church. I mean, being involved in church and having those church friends, but help them find that place where they belong. The second thing is keep in mind, they are not in college yet. I think another huge mistake is that we start talking college when they're in 6th grade. Why are we doing that? We start talking college in 6th grade. They are 11. So, 6th graders should learn how to become 7th graders, and 7th graders should learn how to become 8th graders, and 8th graders should learn how to become high schoolers. And so I think when you are preparing your child, when you're talking about career choice, and I know high schools now make them pick a path of focus, but that doesn't mean a career choice, so don't even talk about it that way. For a freshman especially, this is a chance to dabble in the things and find the thing that you like, and it needs to be presented as opportunities in high school, not opportunities in careers until they're ready to talk to that. Let them take the lead on when they talk about careers.
That's helpful.
Because that's overwhelming. And their brains aren't supposed to be ready for that. They are not supposed to.
So finding that place of belonging for sure, and not making it feel like it's a choice for the rest of their life.
Right. This should not feel like this is the forever.
Yes, that's great. And Kayla, I may throw this your way too. What about for our younger kiddos that are just starting preschool or, maybe even like elementary school, that transition? I'm sure you see a lot of that, especially like separation anxiety. What tips or advice do you have for parents that are going through that with younger kiddos in new schools?
So I feel like that's really the first time a lot of us new mamas and parents experience anxiety in our kids is whenever it's at drop-offs at school. And I will say that as a mom, your heart just wants to like stay with them. If they're crying, you're like, I can help you. Like, I'm here. Like, I'm going to just stay and comfort them until they're done or until they've calmed down. And I will say that for me and in my experience with kids, I have a lot of kids that parents are like, what do I do at drop-off? Like, it is to where there has been times where, we're pulling kids off of their parents. And that's hard not only for the kid, but that's instantly, I know as me, set my anxiety. I know the very first time I ever dropped my daughter off, she cried. And I remember I immediately got in the car and I called my dad and I'm like, I think I'm just going to go get her at lunchtime. And he's like, Kayla, you haven't even let her stay there 20 minutes and you're like already trying to pick up a time of like when you're going to come get her. And I think like that is just our natural instinct to like want to come in and like, okay, we're their safe place, but then we also have to remember and instill in them that school or wherever they're being dropped off, that's their safe place. Example, you would never send your kid to a place if you didn't feel safe dropping them. And I think also reassuring them when you are dropping them off that, hey, this is a safe place. Like, like Miss Megan is one of our teachers here, and I'll use her as an example. Like, Miss Megan loves you. Like, you are going to be so safe in Miss Megan's class, and you're going to enjoy it, and you're going to love it, and I cannot wait to hear all the exciting things that you learned today. And I think, like, just really kind of reassuring them of that and reassuring them that, hey, I'm coming back. And I know with my little girl, we had to do, like, I tell parents, come up with a routine, especially if those drop-offs are very hard in the morning. Come up with the same routine. I mean, I say whenever I felt like I was just on repeat every day from like my car ride home all the way to school, and I felt like I was a robot saying the exact same thing every day. But here I am, my daughter will be 8 in September, and we still say the same 2 things when I drop her off at school. Like, I'm like, what are the 2 things that I need? What do you need? And we say a kiss and a hug. And then I always tell her, like, what's going to happen at the end of the day? You're going to be back. And so I think, like I said, we started that in the 2-year-old classroom when she was here, the whole, what are the 2 things that we need? And I think that's, for us, like, that's, like, kind of our last things that we do before we get out of the car. I mean, we're like, I'm waiting for that door to open. I'm like, okay, I need my last 2 things real quick before I go, And I think kind of setting not only a routine for kids, especially in that separation and that drop-off period, I think you're going to see such a drastic effect. And I will just throw out a helpful tip. Don't stay in the classroom. I know, like, you want to, like, okay, I'm going to give it once I'm going to sneak out once they quit crying. That's not going to work. All you did is make them stop crying, and then they're going to start crying the second they realize you're out of the room. So my advice when it comes to drop off in that separation anxiety, not only to create a routine every day, whether it's you're saying the same exact things every day or you're doing the exact same things. Like, I have a dad that he does like a little elbow bump and a fist bump and they blow it up. They do that every morning, and that's their thing. And I think that you can see that because a kid like gets excited. It's like, all right, Dad, see ya. So not only setting that, but then as a mom, giving that hug. Doesn't matter if they are screaming, hysterical, drop and go. And I promise you, it's not even 3 minutes. Anna is a teacher here. She can contest that we have, and she's in her baby classroom, so that's the very first time mamas, first time kids coming in, that is the easiest thing once you go. And the teachers, most of the time, they'll send you a text or a picture within a few minutes, like, they're safe, they're good, look at them playing. And I think a lot of times it's just us needing to be reminded that children can have other safe spots than you. Like, you're not only their safe place. That whatever environment it may be, whether it's their school, their Sunday school class, that those are safe places for them, and just reassuring them of that.
Awesome. So keeping that structure, that routine, keep it short and sweet, even if they're in tears. Okay, that's helpful. All right, so we have another question here. I'm going to read it to you. I was advised by our pediatrician to engage our 6-year-old in new experiences to help with her social anxiety. I can get her to show up, but rarely can get her to engage with a peer of the same age. For example, we started soccer. I can get my daughter on the field, which took work, but I couldn't get her to kick the soccer ball back and forth to a teammate. Do you have any advice on how to get her to engage socially? So hats off to this parent for getting them there and working them through that, but how do we, once we get them in the door, on the field, how do we get them to really trust that it is their safe space and engage and enjoy it? That's a good question.
I think it's important, kind of like what she had mentioned earlier, that when you're wanting like your kids, even whether it's teens or 6-year-olds or kids, when you're putting them in something, that it is important for them to finish through. I think that right there, having to kind of go back each week, and maybe how about the wins? Like, hey, that first win was you getting on that soccer field. Like that second win was, I saw that you kicked that ball right to Tim on that team, and that was awesome. That may have been the only thing that they wanted to do for the day, and they may have just sat on the field the rest of the time. But that was a win. That was a win that they didn't do before. So I think that it is important, even though that there's a lot of times that we're like, they're upset. I know my daughter, when she started dance, there's a girl that just cried the whole entire time. And my daughter's like, I just don't think it's for me. Like, I just think we'll just do it again, like not come anymore. And I think that the fact that, kind of seeing other kids in that anxiety state, I think that you need to still encourage them, because I'm like, no, it'll get better. And then by the time the third class, the little girl, not only that was experiencing anxiety, she was able to come in with the routine. Now, was drop off every day, flowers and roses? Absolutely not. But it was still the fact that the kid came every Saturday and she still showed up. And I think that that's very important. I also think that that does teach kids something that, like we don't, I think sometimes when we just allow them to like not finish through, I think that kind of just gives them a, kind of like an out when something is not easy for them or that something challenges them, that they're able to just kind of step back like, that's not for me. That's a little too hard for me. But I think we also need to remember, outside of those comfort zones that they have, that is where they experience growth. That's where they're going to experience the breakthroughs, whether it's with the anxiety or just, like I said, even just being able to be on the field and kick the ball. So I do think that it is very, very vital to keep encouraging that. And I do think, like she said, I'm not saying every year, like, you're gonna sign up for soccer because you kicked that ball twice, and I think this year it's going to be like better than last year. You're going to be scoring goals. Obviously, don't induce that kind of anxiety on them, but letting them know, hey, you finished out that season, and not only did you do that, you kicked the ball, you made friends, talking, like, reiterating kind of the good that they did experience, whether it was then, like, you got to see your best friend score a goal today. Like, how awesome is that? Even if it wasn't necessarily something that they did, something that they can relate to and still celebrate.
Thank you.
I think that's such a good answer, Caleb, because you highlighted two really important things. One is celebrate the wins, break it down into steps. Instead of, you got on the soccer field and you didn't score a goal, you got on the soccer field. So celebrate those little wins. And the other thing I think that is so important to remember is our kids learn through adversity. They learn through challenge. And so we don't have to we want to make everything smooth and okay. I was sitting with my husband one night, and we were talking about Cameron, and I was saying, I don't want him to go through, I don't want anyone to make fun of him. I don't want anyone to be mean to him ever. I don't want him to have any hard times. And then I thought to myself, then how will he get strong? What made me strong? Adversity, challenge. And so reminding kids that challenges are character building, and that even though it's hard, it's good to keep pushing through.
Awesome.
So, both great, absolutely spot on. But one thing to also keep in mind is keep trying different things too. If soccer is not her thing, then maybe you try something different. And the biggest thing is, and this was something that I feel like I'm going to have to learn. I was a ball player. I was a basketball coach for 13 years. My daughter is glitter and bows and glamour, and so she's in theater classes right now. Of course, we did theater as well, but so she, but that's going to be her world. She is not, I don't see her ever becoming a basketball player. And so at some point you got to really ask yourself, am I trying to make him, am I trying to celebrate life through him as opposed to, or through her as opposed to, looking to see what is she most excited about. So you just keep experimenting until she finds her thing. And also, celebrate. Their win may not look like your win. Your win may be she kicked the ball the right way, but their win may be that while you were at the soccer game, they were dancing the belly dance, and it made everybody laugh. And everybody who left the soccer field was talking about your son, because your son was doing the walk like an Egyptian up and down the field.
Just coming from personal experience, I'm feeling. I love it.
Your son was, without question, the most entertaining human being, and that was a win. It wasn't the soccer win,
Right.
but it was a win.
It was a win for that child, which is huge.
And you have to celebrate that because that's his thing.
Right.
That's him.
Right. So finish through, hit that adversity, but then once you've made that completion, and celebrate those wins, you can try something else and just keep celebrating their wins specifically. Awesome. Thank you. Well, we have one more question, so we'll read this question, and then since we're running low on time, if anyone has any other questions, feel free to write those down, and I can submit those to you all electronically and be the mediator back and forth and get you those answers. So thank you for those. So our last question
Before
here.
you say that, I will be, I'm just a teacher, but I will be happy if you want to catch me on the way out, if you wanted to talk about anything that was said, just grab me on the way out the door. What am I going to do?
Thank you. Perfect. All right, so our final question for this session here is, what do you do whenever your teenager or young, you know what? Just wait. We already did that one. We're finished, actually. Awesome. So sorry, I didn't pull that one over, but I just wanted to and asking great questions. So we'll close in prayer and then close out. So thank you. Let's bow our heads. Dear Father, thank you so much for just this incredible wealth of knowledge that you have placed in this room. Thank you for these tips and help that we can take out of this church today and apply to those that we love, and maybe even ourselves too. Lord, thank you for these amazing parents and caregivers and just wonderful humans that have walked in this room today, ready to learn and ready to help others grow and to love on others. Be with us throughout this week. Help us to look at you and serve you in everything we do. It's in your name we pray. Amen. All right, thank you all so much. Oh, also, I almost forgot as well. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's session, May 7th, we are doing, Nina Hall has developed something called the Pinky Promise, which is about positive parenting. So she is going to be our guest speaker on May 7th, similar to this setup here, and she's going to be talking about positive parenting tips. So please invite anyone that you think would love to come to that. We'd love to see you back for that on May 7th, 3 o'clock. Thank you.